I think a lot of philosophers philosophize, but I think my favorite people to follow and learn from are mystics, because they're not philosophizing with their brain. What they're spreading and what they're doing doesn't come out of books. It comes out of your heart. It comes
Mm.
from the love within you, within the core of your soul. And every human being possesses that. Everyone.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast.
The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Pej, welcome to Broaderlands podcast.
Good to be here.
It's a weird channel for spiritually weird people, so welcome.
Well, then I fit right in.
Now, I wanted to bring you on because we've been good friends over the years for a long time now, and you stayed around being my friend ever since. I got sober when I was pretty much fairly new, and you stuck around, still being my friend, letting me be me and be weird and think outside the box, and I lost a lot of friends because of that. But I can call you a true friend, so I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that too. I mean, I think I grew up feeling abnormal, and after a while, when I started to adapt to my own abnormality, I just thought, you know what, being abnormal is actually, for me, it's normal. It's like what I like to be. Why would I want to? Weirdness is exactly what I like. I like being this way.
Well, weird mistake.
The weird in me recognizes the weird in you.
Yeah. I wanted to bring you on, and I love your story, and I've heard it over the years, and it's profound. And I wanted to kind of incorporate addiction and spirituality, mysticism, and all that good stuff. The human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to point out, because a lot of times I hear people talk about addiction, and then I just heard one recently from a podcast that's back home where I grew up, and they talked about addiction, but they don't really. They talk about the war stories and getting some help, but I really want to kind of let the listener hear about how it affects our brain development, how it makes us feel, and how these emotions become trapped, and within the resentments, there is some kind of hurt, there's some kind of pain, there's some kind of emotional wound, which we know now is trauma. So I would love for you to talk on that. But before we get started, maybe you can share a little about yourself and what we do and what you do. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I myself, I'm a man of recovery. And when I say recovery, like I'm in recovery from drug addiction, from alcoholism. I am an interventionist, a trained interventionist. I intervene on a lot of people's lives nationally and internationally that are struggling with drug addiction and alcoholism. But I'm also a recovery coach. I do a lot of coaching with families, with adolescents, with families of adolescents and adults, and individual coaching too. Just trying to help people recover from their past and show them that there is hope and that they can actually become the best versions of themselves. That's a lot of what I do. I'm very involved in the spiritual world, and I don't just mean in the 12-step spiritual world, but I mean I think outside the box, and I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading and a lot of studying of many different schools of thoughts when it comes to spirituality. And I also own some recovery homes and a men's house, a women's house, and a lot of people that come through there. As you hear my story, you'll understand why I created those homes. They come through there because they were afflicted and addicted to substances, and also they just had a lot of trauma in their lives. And so when they come to our houses, we do everything we can to try to help them reintegrate back into society, but most importantly, have recovery become the main focus of their life. So they embrace the recovery, they get these big, huge, abundant lives. So that's in a nutshell what I do. I do a lot of other things too. I'm a podcast host for a recovery channel called Pej's Recovery Corner, where we bring a lot of different guests on that are either in recovery from substance abuse, or they're professionals in the field that are experts in the field that work with a lot of recovering addicts or alcoholics, and they have a wealth of knowledge, and they come and talk about they educate. Like that's what we do a lot on my TikTok channel, on my YouTube channel. There's a lot of education that I like to put out there in the universe, and from my knowledge base on what I know, I've been a drug and alcohol counselor. I did drug and alcohol studies, so um, yeah, that's in a nutshell who I am and what I do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll probably want to you get started with your early life, and because addiction always originates in pain, whether it's we're conscious of it or it's hidden in our unconscious. So
Yeah,
I really want to have you share your upbringing, and maybe point out some areas where it affected you that helped probably make you more prone to becoming an addict. Because a lot of
sure.
times we talk about trauma, and you know this in the 12-step rooms, they some of the old timers are trauma phobic, so and they
Mhm.
don't like to talk about that stuff. But it's important to understand how these painful experiences get trapped in us, where we start to look outside for other substances to get relief. So I'd love for you to
Yeah,
walk us into your life because you have a beautiful story.
thank you. So I'm Iranian. I'm Persian, right? I was born in Germany. Both of my parents were Iranian. They met in Berlin, Germany, and that's where they had me and my sister. And so, right out the gate, being a little Iranian kid growing up in Germany, like my first language was German, and I was in preschool, and that was just what I was speaking. And during that, like around 4.5 years old, my mom took my sister and I back to Iran, and she was in contemplation. She wasn't yet sure if she wanted us to be raised in the mother country, or they definitely were thinking about bringing us to the United States, and maybe raising us here too. So when we went back to Iran, she's Esfahani, my dad is Tehrani. I remember being in Tehran, and there's not a lot that I remember from being in Iran at the age of 4.5, but I do remember that we were when we were staying at my mom's house or my aunt's house there. I went downstairs to go uh, outside of the building to go play with these Persian kids, and when I spoke with them in the German language, because that's all I knew, I didn't know how to speak Farsi. They picked on me, and so like bullying was something that I encountered at a very young age. These kids, they pushed me, they picked on me, and they told me not to talk that way. Um, and that way was like the only way I knew how to talk. So already, they were instilling fear within me, and I thought, well, they don't like me here. I'm not going to go outside and play with these kids anymore. So I was like, for the next 6 months, I was indoors a lot, being around, my family and their culture, and probably taking on the Persian language, the Farsi language during that time. We went back to Germany, and my dad stayed in Germany during the time that we were gone. So I remember when we got back to Germany, I was really excited to see my dad again. I missed him so much, and I remember walking like when we got off the plane. We came out, and I walked through this area, and I saw my dad standing in a just a group of crowded people, and I was so excited to see him. I ran into his arms, and he was everything to me, right? And the thing about my dad was that he was a man full of love, but a man full of rage. And this was from early on. As much as he knew how to express his love, he also, uh, when it came to expressing his anger, he had no control. And sometimes he would make me nap next to him, and I didn't want to nap. But he would nap, and if I got up, he would grab my leg and like put me back in the bed and say, "Stay here." And over a period of time, he started using his hands and objects to get his point across too. And so, like early on in life, I knew that even within the house, I can experience trauma, not just
Mm.
outdoors, right, with other people. And then on top of that, my dad was a hardline Muslim during that time. He was praying 5 times a day. Often he would uh, have me come and pray with him alongside him. And you have to understand, like, here I am, this little Iranian German speaking kid trying to do an Arabic, like a prayer in Arabic, not knowing any like what I'm praying to or how I'm praying or how to do. I would just follow his lead, and I would go up and down and go through the motions. But I just thought this is like confusing to me, right? And so there was that. Also, while we were in Iran, my father was he was not faithful to my mother, and he was messing around with a woman. in Germany. And so when my mom came back, she had interactions with that lady, and that lady said that she wanted to take my father for herself to be her man. And my mom said, over my dead body, he's going to raise our kids together. And so my mom's resentments towards my father were already brewing. And I didn't know that all this was going on. I was too young to understand it, but they were not, they were not getting along, you know, and they decided, let's move to the States, United States, as opposed to Iran. And we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places, like Salt Lake City, Utah. So now we're like these we are these brown Iranian people that have moved to Mormonville. I mean, it was like it was Mormon, like tons of Mormons everywhere. It was a major culture shock. Not that we didn't come from Germany, where it was already a certain type of culture that we were exposed to and around. But when we got to Utah, we ended up, you know, my very first day of kindergarten. I started kindergarten, and I was amongst my peers, and I was in a whole new environment. Now I'm learning English, and so I would speak English. I would learn English in school, and I'd come home, and my mom would say, "There's no English in the house." She didn't want us to be speaking. She said, "You learn that stuff in school. You speak that stuff in school, but when you come home, you speak Farsi." And so she was teaching us Farsi within the house, and German was kind of just forgotten, right? And growing up in Utah it was an interesting time. It was this was we got to Salt Lake in 1976, and then the revolution happened in Iran. And right before the revolution, there was hostages that were taken, and they were American hostages. And so, as you know, politically, what was going on in Iran, where these U.S. hostages were taken, I was suffering the repercussions of that from various people. Not all people from Utah were not liking us, right? Like, we were pretty welcomed by the Mormon community when we first moved there with bread baskets and fruit baskets, because I think they definitely wanted us to convert to Mormonism. But, you know, there was a select few people. I remember being in my elementary school, and they would basically push me in puddles or pick on me and say, "You're the Iranian kid," and they were upset. You know, obviously, in their homes, they're probably watching the news. You got these American hostages that were taken in Iran, and so why don't I just become a target for them? So they were beating me up. You know, it was happening quite often, and so there's more abuse and more trauma that was starting to kind of pile up. Now, for a while, we moved to a northern part of Utah, but then we moved back to Salt Lake City, Utah. And in that time, I was like, seventh grade. Life was changing. I was going through an adolescent period. Puberty had hit really hard. I was also, some of the people that I grew up with had grown into different types of people. I was more of a new wave type of kid, and there was one kid that I grew up with before that was more like a heavy metal guy, right? And for some reason, I don't know what happened. Like, he just didn't like me. He didn't like. We were friends as kids, but he didn't like me. And so he said some things to me. He said some things to my mom on the street one day, which then made me very angry, and I saw red. You know, the same anger that my dad had growing up was instilled within me. And so this guy, he was in my junior high school. He walked by me. I saw him approaching me, and he shoved me into the lockers. And the second I fell back, I was so angry. I thought, like, we could fight right here, right now, and they'll break this up really fast, or we can do what a lot of kids do in this school, and they take their fights behind the Mormon church that was like placed behind our school. And by the time I got back, I told him after school behind the church. By the time I got behind that church, this kid, I didn't think he was going to show up. The whole school caught wind of it. Everybody was back there, and I'm just waiting for this guy, and I'm thinking he probably chickened out. He's not going to come. And I turned my head for 1 second, turned back around, and boom! I mean, he just knocked me out cold, right? And so, like, that the ego within me, the human ego that really thought I was going to go back there and handle this guy, pretty much like I got my ass handed to me, right? And it was one punch. I was out cold, and this guy was stomping on my face. I had braces in my mouth. The braces got caught into my jaw. The entire school saw this, so my ego was totally crushed, right? And I remember when I came to, and like I came out of that whole thing, I looked up and saw everybody looking down at me. and I was humiliated beyond belief. Like, oh my God, like the entire school just saw this, right? Like I can't. I was so embarrassed. It was a neighbor lady that came and like kept on pushing me to wake up. So when I got up, she walked me outside of the churchyard, and I was like just staggering and bludgeoned and beaten, and just feeling this sense of humiliation. And I staggered all the way home. And when I got into my house, I didn't even want to talk to my mom because she looked horrified when she saw me walk into the house. She was with my sister, and my dad wasn't home from work yet. But when he did get home from work, he came into my room, and I just saw anger in his eyes. He was angry that I would allow somebody to pulverize me the way that guy did. He said that I should have protected myself, and I felt punished by my father because the next day he told me we're still going to work on the side of the house and we got to paint this roof or the side of the roof, and so I'm on this ladder the next day and I'm already seething. Like resentments are just building up within me. Like I can't stand the guy that did that to me in front of, his name was Vance Stone. Like I can't stand Vance Stone. I'm angry with my father because I got these two big black eyes and he's got me outside painting the side of the house. Like, this is the last thing I want to do right now. I haven't even been able to process my feelings. So, I'm just like bogging stuff down within myself. I'm seething. I'm angry. And that anger would just continue. The guy that did that to me, I was angry with that guy for years, for decades. Like I made a vow within myself that I would never allow somebody to hurt me physically the way that guy did in front of anybody or just at all for that matter. And so I was always in fight or flight mode. I was always the rage that my father had definitely was inherited into my being and myself. And I was of the mindset between the movies I'd see and the TV shows I'd see, I was in the mindset of always like thinking I got to build my empire and be the king of my empire, and nobody will ever be able to take down my kingdom. Right? That's just my mentality. And I loved reading and things like that. Many different types of books. I was definitely a reader as a kid, and so I had a large imagination. And over a period of time, I really hated living in Utah. I just hated living in Salt Lake City, Utah. I thought Utah was the problem. The reason I'm so uncomfortable in my skin is because I don't fit in with these people. I don't look like them. I don't sound like them. I don't talk like them. I try to dress like them, but I'm not them. I even listened to a certain type of music growing up in Utah that not everybody listened to. I like funk music. I like hip hop music. When hip hop, that was like shortly after the origination of hip hop had started to grow. And so I was attracted to it. I love James Brown. I love Michael Jackson. I love Prince. These were things that not your average everyday people in Salt Lake City, Utah were listening to. And so I would beg my dad often, what can we do to move out of this miserable state? Like, I beg you, can we, like, we would go on vacation to Los Angeles, to LA, to California. And for me, going to California was like paradise. It was because you go out, like you're in this cold, miserable state that's pretty much cold 8 to 9 months out of the year. And then you go to like a place like California where there's palm trees and there's not even snow on the ground during the winter. And I begged him so much that my dad was really like diligent about trying to find a job outside of Utah because he knew his kids were suffering. And one day when I was 15 years old, he came home and he said, "I've got good news for you. We're moving to California." And sure enough, like within 2 weeks, we were packed up and on our way out to Cali. And for me, it was a beautiful experience because now I'm 15, almost 16. I am starting in a high school as a sophomore. It was a culture shock. I walked into my high school and I looked around. And I was like, "Whoa." Like, there's black people here, and there's brown people here, and there's yellow people here, and there's Persian people here, and like I don't stand out like the token brown kid amongst all the white kids, and there's not even a Mormon around here. Like everyone's either Catholic, Christian, all that stuff. But so it was really cool. Like I immediately felt at home, right? And I started working at this McDonald's restaurant as a young kid, 15 and a half years old on a work permit. And there was this Mexican dude, and he told me, "Are you new in town?" I said, "Yeah, I'm new in town." He said, "You smoke weed? You drink?" I go, "Absolutely, I do." Because I had already experimented a little bit with drugs and alcohol back in Utah with the other outcasts. But that was like that wasn't, anything serious. I even got drunk at a Persian wedding one time, and so like I was already feeling the effect that was produced by alcohol and drugs at a minimal rate. But although I did black out at that Persian wedding, but now this guy who must have been like 30, 31 years old, and I'm 15, 16 years old, he's inviting me to go have fun with him. And we went to this motel, and at that motel was the first time I ever experienced seeing cocaine on a table. I didn't do the cocaine, but I drank and I smoked weed with the guy. And then I remember going home uh, thinking I'm going to get into a lot of trouble because I'm under the influence and it's super late. And my mom was laying in my bed waiting for me when I got there, and she was not happy. Like she just looked in my eyes and she smelled my breath, and um, she told me that, like, we're going to talk with your dad about this the next day, and we did exactly that. We sat down, and my dad came in with a lot of rage. I wasn't hearing anything that he was saying. It was when your dad just comes at you like aggressively, it becomes a one tone style of hearing. Like I don't hear anything but your anger and your rage, and it's not going to change me. Like I'm just going to become more secretive, or you're gonna make me more rageful, right? But my mom, she came really soft. Like she was always trying to lift me up and empower me and show me the goodness within me. And so she starts talking about, you were so scholastic and artistic and athletic, and who are these people that you're hanging out with that are not good for you? Like in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the doctor's opinion, it says frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, right? And so like you can come at me with all of this soft talk, but like at this point now, I have now found people that want to have fun. And if what you're going to come at with a frothy emotional appeal, like that stuff isn't going to resonate with me as much as these people that are having fun. So I was already off to the races, and on top of that, they decided to move me to a different school for a better education, which was just another school in another part of town. And really, it wasn't a like at this point, like I wasn't going for no better education. I was never really an achiever in grade school. Like I was a daydreamer, right? If the subject didn't appeal to me, I wasn't going to do good in the subject. So like when it came to mathematics and things like that, I was never good at it. I would look around at my peers and think, how do these guys do so good in this stuff? Because I don't even understand what we're talking about. But when it came to like spelling and reading and grammar, I was really good at that for some, because I read a lot. You know what I mean? I like to read a lot. Or art, I liked art. Science, I liked science. History, I even liked history. Like those types of things I liked. But when it came to certain subjects, I didn't do good, so I would totally screw up in school a lot. I was more thinking about other stuff outside the box. Now, when I went to this other school, I turned 16 and I made friends with these two guys. And they were having fun, these two guys, right? Like one was named Amir. He was an Indian guy, like from India. And the other guy's name was Omid, and he was Persian like me. And in our language, Omid means hope. But there was no hope for Omid, right? Like Omid's
Mhm.
dad was working in the hotel industry. He worked late hours. Um, and so he did a lot of cocaine, the father did. And these two guys were already drinking and using, so I'm already hanging out with them and doing the same thing. And I knew, like, at a very young age, like I probably shouldn't be doing this, and my mom would get on my case. So I remember keeping a diary and attempting to stay sober, and even like writing in the diary, I have this many days sober, this many days sober, this is what I'm doing in my life, and this is what I'm doing in my life. But everything turned. Because when you hang out with these people and they're all having fun, you become an oddball. And so I'd be sitting in the room with them thinking, well, God, they're all having fun. And here I am sitting over here trying to stay sober. And I don't even know what sobriety really consists of, but um, it was only a matter of time until I, started picking up and drinking and using and becoming secretive about it and not letting mom find out. And um, but I didn't know she was also reading my diary. So I was taking notes of this stuff, and she would see this stuff. And
Mhm.
eventually, like, she was in full knowledge of what her son was doing. By the time I was 17 years old, I got my driver's license a year late, right? But I finally got it. My dad gave me this 1971 Super Beetle Volkswagen Bug. It was his car prior to mine, and I was really happy. And I finally have a car. And I called out my friends, and I told them, "Listen, guys, tomorrow morning I'm going to pick all you guys up. We're going to go to school in my car." And I'd gotten drunk the night before. I had gotten high the night before, but the next morning I wasn't under the influence, right? So that morning I'm picking all these guys up, and piling them all into the car. I got my girlfriend, I got my sister, 6 people in a Volkswagen Bug. Not recommended. It's too many people to stuff into a little bug. And the music was blaring. It had rained the night before, so the streets were slick. They were wet. And I'm driving up the street, and we were just high school kids having high school fun. I can still, when I imagine, I could still remember it like it was yesterday, the laughter that was in that car, you know? And we got closer to this intersection, and right before the intersection, this little 14-year-old kid was on his bicycle, comes out of nowhere, and darts right out into the street in front of my car. And I couldn't hit the brakes fast enough, and this kid's bicycle and body went over the hood of my car into the windshield. The windshield shattered, and the car kept rolling and crashed into this minivan, and this kid's body was flung over the minivan headfirst into the ground. And my whole world went into slow motion, and I got out of the car, and I looked at all my friends in the car, and they had blood all over their faces from the impact of the broken windshield. That it was just a scene, man. And I remember tasting blood trickling down from my forehead because I'd cut my forehead from the windshield, and it was going into my mouth. And I thought, did I just hit a human body? And I went and looked around the side of this minivan and saw the kid laying face down with blood gushing out the top of his head. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And the police came, and an ambulance came, and an ambulance whisked the kid off to the hospital, and the police took me down to the police station, and they asked me a lot of questions. They were, they wanted to see exactly what happened, and I'm just answering these questions to the best of my knowledge, and then they released me. And for the next few days, I was just on the edge of my seat thinking, like, what's going to happen to my life? Like, I knew the kid was on life support. He had not died at the scene, but he didn't have much of a standing chance brain-wise. Like, he had suffered major brain damage from hitting the asphalt. And so his mom kept him on life support for 4 days, but then she ended up taking him off of life support because he would have been a complete vegetable. And so here I'm the 17-year-old kid experiencing such a massive amount of trauma that one could encounter. I didn't know what to do with myself. It was like, how the hell do I live life now? Like, the entire school knows about this. All the schools know about it because the kid went to another high school. What an embarrassment, right? Like, when I was 12, 13 years old, that whole school got to see me get my ass kicked by this guy. And now at this school, everybody sees, like, this guy lost his life. And people would come up to, as a result of me driving this car, people would come up to me on the street and say, hey, Pej, aren't you the guy that killed the kid on the bicycle? And like, that didn't sit well with me. I'd argue them, like, what do you mean killed the kid on the bicycle? Why would you say something like that to somebody? Like, I didn't intend to go out and kill him that day. It was an accident, right? On top of that, this became an ultimate excuse for me to drown my sorrows, my anguish, my sadness, my pain into drugs and alcohol. I was already a frequent user of drugs and alcohol before, but now it just became like an everyday thing. And on top of that, I left my regular high school to go to the other high school, which was one of them schools that was like for people that were not achieving well in school, right? One of them bonehead high schools. And I was in this other school where you don't really participate in class if you even make it to class. And that was kind of like what I was doing. I was hanging out with people. I was hanging out with other people that were lower companions, if you will, right? People that weren't really achieving scholastically in life. And so, you know what? I started getting into a lot of trouble. Like, I was kind of a knucklehead, man. I was a 17-year-old kid just living recklessly and getting into lots of fights and arguments and breaking a lot of laws and just it's a little criminal, like, out doing criminal activities. And I found my way into some holding cells and some jails, like, to be on hold. And then I finally found my way into juvenile court. And when I was in a juvenile court, I was told by this judge to come to the stand, and that I've been a complete menace to society, and that based off of all of these other crimes that have piled up in the last few months, and on top of that, I had a vehicular manslaughter charge without gross negligence. He decided to put me in juvie, and it was projected for me to go for at least a year, which would have gone well into my 18th year of age. when I was in there, some things happened. They thought I was a danger to myself. They put me in a unit called Unit L, and Unit L was amongst the inmates was called the Looney Unit. It was the psych portion of this detention facility. And when I was in there, like I saw things that I could never erase from my mind. Right. Besides the fact that there was feces and mucus on the walls, there was people in there that were adolescents that had murdered. Some of them because of mental health, some of them because they were gangbangers. But there was never a dull moment in there, even when you're locked down for 21 hours a day, right? And me, I would sit in my cell, and I often ponder and think, like, to what has happened, like, what has become of my life? Like, how did I end up locked up in here? 17-year-old kid counting the bricks on the walls and reading whatever literature I can get into my hands. And at that point in my life, I got to a point where I thought, I've always wondered about God, but I don't think I believe in God now. Like, why would God, if there was such thing as a God, why would God put me in this position? And why would God take that kid's life from him? Like, he didn't even know he was going to die. He was just on his way to school that day, and 4 days later, he's dead, blackout, gone, just like that. I don't have no room for a God like that in my life. I renounced God. Stop believing. I told myself I'm an atheist. What little I knew about what being an atheist meant, I knew it meant not to believe in God at all. Like, there's no existence of God. At least that's what I believe. Then they put this guy in as my cellmate, and this guy was he was a teenager, right? He was a devil worshiper. And so this guy would sit in my cell and start doing seances to the devil, and he would get his hands on Christian magazines and pull out these pictures of different crosses, like artistic crosses. And somehow he got some gum and he put them upside down all around this cell, and he's like doing seances to the devil. I'm like, what the hell is this? So I'm like begging the guard, like, can you please take this guy out of my cell? And in that time, we got this opportunity to go to church sometimes on Sundays. If you wanted to, you get out of your cell for an hour. I mean, I'd take any opportunity to get out of my cell. So I'd go to church, whatever. But then they also gave you this opportunity to hear a panel. It was an AA panel, right? And I didn't know what a panel was, but they said, does anybody want to hear a message of hope? They popped our doors, and that's what I would hear on the speaker. Anybody want to hear a message of hope? I'm like, sure, what does that even mean? But if it gets me out of my cell, let's go. So I go into this room, and this old man would come in. He was a priest. This dude was a priest, right? A priest that had a pack of cigarettes in his pocket right here. It was like amazing to me. I thought, okay, I thought the body was a temple, but okay. But my eyes were fixated on the guy's cigarettes. Like, I wanted his cigarettes more than I wanted his message, but he was coming and reading out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the message of AA was being carried to me at a very young age, right? 17. But you have to understand, like, at the time, I'm still hip, slick, and cool. Like, I still got a lot of mileage on me. I'm not ready to receive a message. I firmly believe that I became an agnostic during that period, probably because the guy was reading from the big book in the chapter We Agnostics. And I somehow learned that being an agnostic means that you believe in something, but you're just not sure if it's God. Like, you don't want to necessarily label it as God. But so I thought maybe, this whole thing of being an atheist was a little bit, it wasn't too well thought out. And on top of that, like, what if there is such thing as God? And here I am, this hardline atheist. Maybe I could just be an agnostic and call myself that, and we'll just call it a day, right? Like, that's what I'm going to take on. And so for a long time, I kind of just wanted to be of that mindset. And I thought, even getting out of juvie early, like, I convinced myself when I would be locked up that when I get out of here, I'm going to be a sober man. I'm going to be a good man. I'm not going to do drugs anymore. I'm not going to hang out with those knuckleheads. It was like there was a little angel on my shoulder telling me all the good stuff, like, you need to do this, you need to do that. But there was this little devil, it seemed like, which was, the ego, whispering in the other ear, but when you get out, you got to smoke a little bit of weed, right? And so it was like, there was like this little inner battle within, right? And sure enough, I stayed in there for a little while longer, and finally I did get out. And during that time, my parents were going through a divorce, which really messed with me more because I didn't want my parents to split up, man. We came to this country together as a family unit. And as much as there was dysfunction in our family, and there was a lot of tumultuous interactions. Like I didn't want my family to break up. So while I'm locked up, you guys are splitting up. They're separating and then they're divorcing. So now I get out of juvie and I'm going to my mom's house. And we would get into it. Oh, mind you, the second I got out, I was greeted at that one school, the F up school, right? With people that had blunts and joints and hits of ass. I mean, I was loaded by first period. So there was no there's no way I could turn it down. Like I wanted to get high. So I move into my mom's. I'm high on the first day I'm out of juvie. And I would get into it with my mother. You know, at the time I was 17 and going on 18. I was this kid that had body dysmorphia. I was not satisfied with my body. I saw other people have these muscles in high school, and I asked this one and that one, and they said we go down to Mexico and we get steroids. And so, in order for me to overcome my body dysmorphia, I start putting this stuff in my body to enhance my muscles and make me look more attractive and bigger. And on top of that, the steroids would fuel the rage within, right? So now I'm this monster that's just like becoming a huge dude, pulling all the women, thinking that I'm really somebody. The ego's just getting stroked. It's just growing right within me. And I would get into physical fights with people. I would get into arguments with my mother. I would punch holes in the walls. There was a lot of rage, right? I never understood the psychology behind punching holes in the walls because you're messing up the wall and you're messing up your knuckle. But definitely, I think it's just this anger. I just want to hit things, right? And so I get into it with her, and I go to my dad's house, and he lived on the other side of town. And me and my pops would be cool for a little while, but he'd say some stuff to me that like wouldn't sit well with me, and then I get into it with him. And by the time I turned 18 years old, I was like a man that could hold my own. And for once in my life, when my dad said something I didn't agree with, I put up a fight, and I got physical with him. And I put my hands on that man. As much as he would put his hands on me growing up and he felt a lot of remorse a lot of times after he beat me. I felt the same way with him. And
so let me ask you a question really quick.
Sure.
Because you obviously had a lot of trauma and you had a lot of emotional baggage already get stuffed down in you. You're not dealing with it. And you've heard me mention this before. Gabor Mate, who's like a hero of mine, he talks about sometimes when he's giving a talk, he'll ask the crowd, is heroin addictive, yes or no? Is alcohol addictive, yes or no? Is cocaine addictive, yes or no? Is sex addictive, yes or no? And he says the answer is embedded in the question, depending on the amount of pain you need to soothe. And you brought up a priest coming to carry the message to you in juvie, right?
Yes.
And there's just a Jesuit saying, give me your child for the first 7 years and I'll tell you the man they'll become. Now, if you look at your early childhood, did that already make up the perfect storm to become an addict?
That's a great question. That is a great question. A lot of people say I was born there's a lot of people in the 12-step world when they tell the story, they say, I believe I was born an alcoholic. I believe I was born an addict. I don't believe I was born an addict or an alcoholic. I believe wherever we are raised, whatever we're raised around, we imitate our atmosphere. So let's say, for example, you know how I said my mom decided, do we want to go to Iran or do we want to raise our kids in America? What if I grew up in Iran? What if they'd taken us there, my sister and I? Would I turn into a methamphetamine heroin addict? I don't necessarily think so. I may have grown up around other people, but perfect storm to become an addict based off of the life happenings that happened here in America for me growing up, between feeling less than in Utah, or feeling out of place because I was a different race. I made excuses within myself to get outside of myself. And how did I do that? Because I started hanging out with other people that felt different too, that were experimenting with drugs. And because they were doing it and I was seeing them doing it, I did it too.
And then, I also hear a lot of tragic moments. And how did that create the voice in the head and negative narrative in your mind that you probably weren't aware of? And you're starting to speak unhealthy about yourself. And a lot of times in science, you'll hear them say children are narcissists in the developmental sense, because we don't know, we take everything personally. Like when my
Yeah.
father left my family, I took it personally. Like I remember thinking in my mind, if I would have just been a better son, more lovable, my dad would have
Yeah.
stayed with us. I took the blame in my head, and that started to create a false narrative in my mind. And I listened to it because I was unconscious. You know, a lot of times trauma is the loss of self, right? And
Hmm.
recovery is to get back. And
Yeah.
I heard a TED talk one time, and the gentleman said, you know, what do you say? He said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Connection.
And you can see where these events, these painful experiences, and not knowing how to cope with them or talk about them, and so on, and deal with them in healthy ways,
Hmm.
um, they get trapped in me and they knock me out of self. You
Yes.
know, and I could hear that, and you explain it so beautifully in your story, how you started to have all these emotions and these feelings, the inability to talk. How did that affect you? Do you, now looking back at that little child, do you see how you kind of didn't have a chance?
Right. I mean, you know what? I see my girlfriend's kid right now. He's 9 years old, and I think to myself, how was my little 9-year-old brain?
Mm.
The kid is a debater. He's debating everything all the time. He thinks he's right about everything. We catch him in lies constantly. I was lying from a very young age. I was sneaky. I was hiding things. What was I trying to hide? I was trying to hide. I didn't want people to really see my truth, but I didn't even know what my own truth was that young, right? I was developing my narrative most definitely. And I think that a lot of the negative self-talk that was within me conflicted with the positive self-talk that was being taught to me, for example, by my mother. My mother empowered me. My mother nurtured me. My mother came with strong amounts of love. My dad came with love, but he came with rage at other times. So I was taking on, we even like Don Miguel Ruiz when he talks in the Four Agreements about how we're raised with the victim and the judge within us, right? Where was the judgment within me? Why was I so quick to judge so many people on the outside? It was because I was judgmental of myself, and rather than focus on me and seeing who I am, I'll find everything wrong with you. And so that's
Mm.
the way I was. I was judging people, such as the guy that beat me up in front of everybody. I was judging the people that would say you're the guy that killed the kid on the bicycle. I was judging my father that would make me feel less than or lower because I didn't hold my own and didn't fight back, because it was an embarrassment for my father, I think, to see his son get beat up. He would have liked to have a son that was tough and tough like him and would be able to hold his own. So I think the negative self-talk definitely started at a very young age and kind of just developed into like an adolescent period.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up about the genes, and a lot of times in the 12-step communities, they say it's in our genes. We're born this way, and then they talk about the disease model, right? And
Hmm.
we've talked a lot about the disease model ourselves together, and the disease model is misleading because it ignores what really happened. I think
Hmm.
it's always important to look at our upbringing, and there's one thing they don't talk about in the 12-step community, and I wish they eventually will, is epigenetics, which means above the genes, right? And we've
Hmm.
learned, like Bruce Limpton would say, it's by changing our perception um, about ourselves, about our life, in our environment, that can turn on and off our gene expression. So we are not victims of our genes. We are creators. Like kind of like in the Bible, we're made in the image of God. But if we
Hmm.
stick to this negative belief and we continue to not clean up that stuff inside of us and do that inner work, that shadow work,
Yeah.
we're always gonna you know um, we might eventually get loaded again. If we don't have do that inner work. I think, like in the Gnostic text, it says, "What you find, what is within you, what you find will save you. What you do not
Hmm.
find it within you, what you do not find will destroy you." Or Carl Jung says, "Those who look outside dreams; those who look inside awakes." So we got to do inner work. How did you do? Did you eventually do inner work on yourself, and how did you heal? I know you have a beautiful story about healing from that situation when you hit that person with your car. Would you
Hmm.
Can you touch on that and how you started to heal and start to you know how the healing process all took place to become recovered from addiction?
I'd like to work my way up to that to talk about that, because that was like a turning point for me when I got into recovery. But I do know this, that all throughout my young adulthood, let's say from 18, 19, all the way up to 30 years of age, by the time I was 35 and I got sober, there was always within me, I believe it was the little soul. It was a small percentage of the goodness within me that knew the difference between wrong and right, but it had a very soft voice. My ego, which some people like to label as the disease of addiction or the devil within, had a very loud voice. It definitely had me in the grips of addiction, right? Like it would, anything that was good, I was always pushing out because I didn't want to have to feel that stuff. So I would keep using. And a lot, even in my mid 20s, people that would see me, they really think Pej has it going on, because he slings drugs and he goes to strip clubs and he does. I mean, everything that could nurture the ego. I was living this lifestyle.
Mm.
I was the best drug dealer. I had the best drugs. People come to my house. Everybody responds to me. Everybody answers to me. I got the homies over here. They got my back, and we'll fight together, and nobody can mess with this. Because I talked about early on, I wanted to create an empire, because I never was going to let anybody bring me down the way that guy did when I was an adolescent. Even when I would sell drugs to pregnant women or women with kids, I had this little, my conscience would tell me, this isn't right. What are you doing? You're going to sell this woman drugs, and she's going to do the drugs, and that little fetus inside of her is going to potentially become addicted to the drugs. This isn't right. But I would say, I need the money. I don't care. I don't want to feel like, I don't want to feel bad. Right. So by the time I was 30, I started having more police interaction, getting locked up more, being reintroduced to the 12-step world, not being interested in the 12-step world. Between 30 and 35 years of age, I ran my life into the ground so much, to the point where I was a homeless man.
Mm.
And when I was a homeless man, my ego was still so big that because I lived out of my car, I think I was like those homeless people that live in tents and live on the outside of the storefronts. If anything, like, don't label me homeless, or I'm executive homeless, right? Because I have a car, right? But reality was, I was dying inside, spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. I was a scared little boy that probably potentially stunted his spiritual and mental and emotional growth from the time I first started using drugs at the age of 12, right? And so when I was 30, I got out of jail, and my mom took me to a Persian sober living. This is before I became homeless, right? And in that Persian sober living, there was this little man that answered the door, and his name was Siamak. We called him Sia. And he looked, and I mean, he kind of looked like Yoda, right? Like a little Persian recovery Yoda. Kind of sounded like Yoda with a Persian accent. And I remember he opened the door and he's like, "Hello, welcome. This is sober living. We have rules, we have regulations, we have chores. We go to meetings." And I just looked at him. I'm like, riveting. But my ego wasn't going to stay there to take on any of this stuff, because there's too much talk of recovery. I wasn't ready to recover yet. I was 30 years old, fresh out of jail. I went and looked at this house, didn't stay at his house, went to somebody else's house, and I worked my way back into my mom's life and house. From 30 to 34, I lived a lifestyle that took me to the streets. And when I was a homeless man at the age of 35, almost 36, when life wasn't working anymore, there was a series of events that happened that were eye-opening, that led me into the path of recovery without me even knowing I was about to go in the path of recovery. I called my mom one last time after 7 months of homelessness, and she told me, she had me write down somebody's phone number. When I wrote down that person's phone number, he led me to a house in a whole other town. And when I knocked on that door, that little Persian recovery Yoda from 5 years before answered that door. I don't think that happened by mistake.
Mm.
I don't think that happened by mistake. I know we have a close-knit community in our recovery world, but to be at the front doorstep of a man's house that I met 5 years before at a whole different house, they say, "Is it odd or is it God?" I looked in that man's eyes and I said, "I know you." He said, "I don't know you." I said, "How do you not know me? I was at your house. You had a house in Beach Boulevard 5 years before. He said, "Yeah, I had the house. I don't remember you." And I said, "How would you not remember me?" He goes, "Because I remember the ones that stay, not the ones that keep going back out and doing the same song and dance." And when I went into his house, this guy was a straight shooter, man. This guy was a man of recovery, former bank robber that never got busted, former heroin addict that tried to quit 19 times. And finally, on the 20th time, he got it, right? And he brought me in. I came in with a big ego, with a lot of old ideas, and we were in constant conflict with each other. And we had a lot of power struggles in the beginning. But over a period of time, I put my guard down, and the little soul started to get a louder voice. And I started realizing, you know what? This guy is a good man. And this guy's trying to save you from you. And this guy's living within this recovery home, dedicated and devoting his life to helping people. What are you fighting against? And so, because I had a lot of old ideas, I was still a liar, a cheat, and a thief, right? So I would sit in groups and I would lie through my teeth, and I had a master plan to still get high when I get out of here. But I got called out on that by that guy, because that man would read between the lines. He was like, he was very intuitive. Like, he was very, very smart when it came to realizing who's full of. He would say, you know, Pej, you're so inauthentic. You're inauthentic about your own inauthenticity. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. He said, you want me to break it down for you and simplify it? I said, sure. He goes, you're so full of shit. You're full of shit about being full of shit. I was like, ugh, that doesn't sound good. And then I had to like go a little deeper and think about it. I'm like, so I'm that bad at trying to pull one over on this guy that I'm pulling one over on myself without even knowing I'm pulling one over on myself. Like, that's really bad. One night after he called me out in a group and I lied through my teeth and I wasn't about to come clean in front of my peers, he went back to his office, and he would often sit in his office for hours and just read. And I remember, like, something happened within me where I thought, I need to go get honest with this guy. And I went into his office and I sat down and I said, hey, can I talk to you, Mr. Sia? And he said, yeah. We sat down and I said, listen, I want you to know something. I lied through that whole group today. He said, I knew you were lying. I said, how'd you know? He goes, the whole room knew you were lying. I'm like, so nobody believed me? I said, Pej. He said, Pej, like, I don't expect you to change right away, but if you don't start getting honest with yourself, you're not going to make it very far in this world. Not in recovery, not in life. I said, okay, so what do I do? He said, why don't you tell me a little bit about your life so I get to know you better, and then I can tell you what my recommendations are. I said, how much time you have? He said, 2 hours. I said, all right. I told my life story. He said, I think we need to do this thing for you called a psychodrama. I'm like, what's a psychodrama? He said, you'll see. My mom wasn't visiting me during the time that I was in his recovery home. It really hurt my feelings because I really hadn't talked to her in a long time and I missed her. And 2 weeks later, he had this family group, very powerful, he would have these multicultural family groups where he'd get all of the different clients in his homes, families to come together in this room. And we were in a big circle and we would all interact with each other. He'd require that the other families members be in recovery too, like Al-Anon or Codependency Anonymous, because our community has a lot of codependency. And on that night, my mom came. And she was sitting over there and she didn't even say hi to me. And my peers were there. My sister was there. Even my sponsor in AA came. He told me, I'm just going to walk you through this. I said, what are we doing? He said, we're going to do a psychodrama, like I said. And I go, what is that? He goes, just be with me, Pej. One of the clients had a 12-year-old kid. He had the 12-year-old kid come and lay on the ground, and he put a bed sheet over that kid's body. Mm. He told me to walk around the room. He dimmed the lights and kind of he made the aura of the room very, calming. And he had me walk around the room, and he started saying, so tell us about the day of your car accident. I said, what do you want to know? He said, just be with me, Pej, because I kept like jumping ahead. He was like, just be with me. What was it like that day? I said, well, that morning I woke up, I was excited, even though I was hungover from the night before, excited to call my friends and tell them all to be ready for me to go pick them all up. And one by one, they all piled into my car, my girlfriend, my sister, everybody. said, what was the music playing on the radio? Go, yeah. He goes, what was playing? I said, Summer of '69, Bryan Adams. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, what else was going on? I said, well, the windows were rolled down. I could smell the fresh lemon trees in the air. And the streets were wet. So, like, the car was kind of sliding around a little bit. I said, okay, then what happened? I said, and then I approached this intersection. And before I got to the intersection, it happened within one instance in flash. I saw this kid right in front of my car and I couldn't hit the brakes fast enough. And he went right over the hood of my car. Then, like, as I'm telling this and talking about it, the tears are rolling down my face, and I'm looking at my mom sitting over there. Her face was shaking, and there was tears in her eyes. The whole room was in tears, right? I mean, come on, Persians, man, they get emotional. He said, okay, come over here for a sec, Pej. After I went through all the motions of everything that went down, he said, come over here and get down on one knee. And he was already down on one knee. And he had me put my hand on top of this live kid that's under this blanket. He said, put your hand on top of this. I could feel his chest. He said, what was the name of the kid that you hit on the bicycle? I said, his name was David. He said, tell David how you feel about him losing his life. This is representing the corpse of the kid that you hit. I'm like, Sia, please don't do this to me, man. This is heavy. He goes, just be with me. Do this. I said, listen, David, I want you to know I'm so sorry that you lost your life. I never expected for you to lose your life. If I could go back and relive that day, I wouldn't have gone up that street. I said, okay, now tell him about your life. I said, my life? What do you mean, my life? I don't have a life. I've never had a life. I don't know what having a life is like. He goes, okay, so tell him, do you want to make a commitment, Pej? I said, yeah, I'll make a commitment. He said, what's your commitment, Pej? I said, I want to help every single addict and alcoholic one day at a time, of every race, creed, and color, one day at a time for the rest of my life. He said, you really want to make that commitment? And I said, yeah. And I looked over at my mom's face, my sponsor's face, my sister's face, all my peers. And I had this thought in my mind for 1 second. It was the little soul. It said, don't screw this up. Move forward. You've been waiting for this day for many, many years. It was the most healing moment without me even knowing that I was healing right then. I woke up the next morning. I felt like 1,000 pounds had been lifted off my back. This was, boo-boo, that was my absolute turning point for recovery. That is where I made this decision. No more smoking weed secretly eventually. No more drinking. No more going back to the old lifestyle. I'm moving forward and I'm going to be on the path of recovery. Mm-hmm. So then how do I get in recovery? Like, now that I'm taking this thing serious, what am I going to do different? I got into the steps of the 12 steps. I worked the 12 steps. I got over my hang up of not believing in God or higher power. And it wasn't just because I was reading the big book, this might sound cocky, but it's my truth. I believe I had a psychic change and I made a decision not to use or drink anymore before I even got into the 12 steps. I didn't need to have spiritual awakening to decide I'm not going to get high anymore. I believe that event with Mr. Sia, the psychodrama, was definitely the onset of me making that decision, but also like something within myself said I got to do this 100%. Now, I did develop a relationship with a loving higher power, which I call God. I know a lot of people get caught up on the word God and labels, and I know it's consciousness, and I definitely felt the consciousness of my creator, and I still feel it on a daily basis. I don't think that God keeps me sober. I hear a lot of people when they share in 12-step meetings, they say, I'm sober as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous and all credit goes to God. And like, yeah, I mean, you know what, if I'm very humble in the way that I speak, it's a lot different than the way that I act. If I say all credit goes to God no matter what for me. Like, God brought me this far to be able to do what I do. But I give myself a lot of credit to stay sober. I have done that inner child work. I've tapped into who I was as a kid and the way I would live carefree and the happiness that I carried within my heart and the way that my mother nurtured me to be a good kid. Now I can go back and recreate myself and go back to that original form, the restoration, if you will, as as it talks about in the 12 steps too, right? Um, I was, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I wanted to stop right there because you said you had an awakening before the 12 steps. And most people don't realize that the whole purpose of the 12 steps is to have an awakening. Some people may have it like I have, just like you. I had it the day I woke up, and I had an inner shift in me. And I knew from that day forward, I was no longer going to live, drink, and party and live the way I was living anymore. I knew I was awakened from that delusion and those illusions of separateness and that all that stuff. I was pretty clear to me. I had an awakening before the 12 steps. It's, it comes to people, and we don't know how it comes. It comes mysteriously. You know, some people have it before. I know old timers that hide the fact that they never did the 12 steps. And people get judged because they're afraid of being judged. We don't know when we're going to have an awakening. I had it beforehand. It was through pain. I was in a lot of pain, and I had that moment of clarity, which it sounds like you had too. And I love your story. I love
I
your
had a lot of
story.
moments of clarity. If there's something I actually want to say about that stuff, as I said, I was a reader, so I was always studying things. I had my first sponsor in AA was a fan of Emmett Fox. So besides the fact that we were going through the 12 steps of AA, we were also studying, books by Emmett Fox extensively. And the second I would see Jesus, I was turned off to that, right? Because I thought, oh my God, that's like low key Christianity. And I've already gone to Christian churches and Mormon churches and Catholic churches, and I've done all my research. I read the Bible when I was locked up a lot of times, right? So like I had, but I thought I was turned off to seeing the name Jesus. Not that I don't like Jesus. I think Jesus, if Jesus really existed, was a good man that hopefully was in his purest form trying to help people. But like I would read Emmett Fox's books and think this is powerful. Like this is actually, I want to keep an open mind to this. Or I started studying Marianne Williamson. But here's something that stood out to me. First of all, I want to let it be known. Spiritual, and this is my outlook. Spiritual experiences happen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They happened when I was on drugs. There was a lot of spiritual experiences when I was on drugs. You know, when I'm streaking at a rave, running through a field, listening to tons of music on ecstasy, candy flipping or hippie flipping, like that is a very spiritual experience within itself. Not to promote or condone people going and doing LSD, but a lot of people that when they do LSD, they say they have some of their most spiritual moments within their own thought processes. The problem is the come down of it, or the withdrawals of it, or coming off of it, the way that we wear the brain down, then it can become depressing, or you can become suicidal and have the suicidal ideation because you're really taking a lot out of yourself. But for me, the spiritual experiences happen all the way up. Everything that led me up to finally wanting to get sober were all spiritual experiences. And then check this out. While in rehab, while in that recovery home, this is a spiritual experience within itself. And I think you might like this because I think we're both fans of this man. I would sit, and there was on Monday nights, they had these educational classes for the people in rehab. And they were usually videos, and sometimes they broke down the frontal cortex of the brain and this and that. And I was so bored, man. I don't want to hear this shit. I'm coming off a meth bender, and I don't want to even learn all of this educational scientific stuff, right? But every once in a while on a Monday, Mr. Sia would bring out this thing called The Secret. It was a DVD of this thing called The Secret. And you would hear these spiritual practitioners come on there, and you saw this guy with like dreadlocks, Michael Beckwith. And like he had dreadlocks, and I was like, the way that he talked and the way some of the other practitioners talked, it was like, law of attraction. It was straight up like talking about you create your energy. And if you're going to have a positive outlook in life and you be and act positive, your energy will be positive. And if you're going to be negative, you're going to be stuck in that, that negative thinking, that negative self-talk, that depressive thought process. I think between the steps and reading the bedevilments and seeing that prey to misery, when it's saying like I'm a prey to misery, and hearing Siamak, like in some of his groups, tell a client something like, there's nothing I can do for you because you're committed to misery. He's saying committed to misery. The big book's saying prey to misery. I'm seeing The Secret. So I'm watching The Secret. I'm like, I'm enthralled by The Secret. I love watching The Secret. Every other week when we would do educational, I'd say, can we watch more of The Secret? And by the time I was a year and a half sober, as a person that grew up as the biggest Prince fan in the entire world, I won a contest to go to Prince's house. Prince, the musician, right? The greatest musician of all time. Fight me, argue me on that. But that guy was the best of the best,
It
right?
was a mystic, right?
He was a mystic. I went to his house. He was a mystic. We are all mystics. We're all of humanity. Every human being is a mystic. The only problem is
We're
not
not
enough of us.
attuned to it. We're not
We don't
attuned to
tap.
it.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't tap into that like our mystical qualities, which is at the end of the day, it's love. It's shedding the ego. It's being of service, and it's truly living in God's light. Because as much as God is outside of us, God is within us too. We are a piece of God. That means we are God, right? A lot of people won't agree with that, and I don't care what a lot of people think. Like I know I feel God within me every single day, and so here's what happened. I go to Prince's house. This was like a dream for me when I was a little kid. When I was 12 years old, I dreamed. I had a dream one time that I was in a house with Prince having a conversation with him. Fast forward, I'm a year and a half sober, 37 years old. I won a contest, and I went to a house that Prince rented in Beverly Hills. And he performed for us in his house and had conversations with us. So the dream came true from when I was a kid. A year later, he's performing at a concert. It was right here at the Los Angeles Forum. And I'm standing next to this girl who I just met that night that's a Prince fan. And we're looking at people that Prince is bringing up on the stage. And I look and I see there's a guy that Prince just brought up that looks super familiar with long black dreadlocks. And the girl says, "Oh my God, that's my guy." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I'm part of Agape." And that guy, he's did she say preacher or something? Because I know he was a former preacher, right? She said that's our pastor or something like that. I'm like, how come he looks so familiar? She goes, because that's Michael Beckwith. I'm like, oh my God, that's the guy from The Secret. And so within time, I had to know what this Agape was, the movement. And I had a girlfriend I started dating. She was a member of Agape. She would go quite often. So I got to not just go there, but then meet Michael Beckwith. Do you think this stuff happens by mistake? Do you see the way it all categorically like just came together in my life? Everything from my love for the greatest musician, I get to be in his house. The dream came true, right? On top of that, through him of going somewhere and seeing this guy who I just saw in rehab on a video before, now I see him in real life, and then God happens to put someone right next to me who happens to go to this thing, and she told me you should go to Agape. I started attending Agape quite regularly, and the cool thing about Agape was like they're not non-denominational. It means people from all different religions come to it, right? Or even people with no religion come to it. And what does he talk about? He talks about God within, the oneness, finding yourself, being the best version of yourself. It's everything that we learn in the 12 steps. My mom used to tell me, Pej, if you think the 12 steps is original, it's not original. Everything you're learning in there comes from ancient wisdom, from a long time ago. And my mom was a big fan of Rumi. Not just because Rumi was somewhat Persian, although I don't think he was really, 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 really Iranian, although a lot of Iranians like to say. My mom started, because she was always, my mom grew up Islamic, but then took a break from Islam to try to really find what she wanted to find. When my dad used to pray 5 times a day, my mom wasn't even practicing being a Muslim. And later on in life, she would go to lots of Rumi classes that were conducted and taught by Iranian Rumi teachers, Molana, Masnavi, right, if you will. And then she finally happened to, and that within itself is a whole other story, but the way she found this one teacher was actually from this man would come and visit somebody in the rehab I was at, and that guy taught Rumi like no other. And so we would go to his classes. And when I started learning about Rumi, I realized that man was a phenomenon. He didn't even write his stuff, man. The stuff just flowed out of him. It flowed out of him like raps flow out of Eminem. Like he could just make things rhyme that nobody else could make rhyme, right? And I believe that those are our mystical qualities. If we are mystics and we tap into the deepest parts of our souls, our essence, then we really, really get to be able to spread that love into the universe. And I create the houses that I have. One of them is a woman's house named Limitless Journey. It's a sober living house for women, because when you get on the path of recovery, it's limitless. Like you could just there's so much to get out of life. You have this overabundant life. And my men's house is called Essence. And I often sit the guys down in the house and I say, "Do you guys even know why we call this house Essence?" Because your essence is it's the purity, like your purest form within, right? And if you can actually tap into that, you conduct yourself differently. You see things through a different lens in life. And that's where I feel like I am in my life. I don't walk on water, and I don't want to claim that I do. But I also, Socrates says the only thing that I know is that I don't know. I think Socrates was full of shit. Like he knew, right? Like he was no dummy, right? And it wasn't because he was a philosopher. I think a lot of philosophers philosophize, but I think my favorite people to follow and learn from are mystics, because they're not philosophizing with their brain. What they're spreading and what they're doing doesn't come out of books. It comes out of your heart. It comes
Mm.
from the love within you, within the core of your soul. And every human being possesses that. Everyone. I do believe in God. I do believe God is the absolute. You know, I don't really, and that's just from what I feel from within myself. I might be wrong, but even Voltaire said, even if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. And I used to get hung up on calling it a him because I had daddy issues, so I called my God a her, a she, because I didn't have mommy issues. I'm a mama's boy, right? But I very comfortably talk about God now. And I used to think I shouldn't talk about God so much in like 12-step meetings, because how did I feel when people talked about God? I would be turned off to. But no, I talk about my relationship with God. And it's not just my God. I believe it is a universal God. It's a God that is the creator of everything and is a loving God. If God wasn't love, then how come us humans carry love or have the ability to carry love amongst each other?
Yeah, thank you. Alan Watts once says, God is what no one admits to being, yet everyone really is. And I think God is our true essence, and you brought up essence. And a lot of times, yeah, I think when we tap into our true selves, you know what I mean? So much stuff just blossom, intuition, higher intelligence, awareness, the expansion of consciousness. And we start to look at things through the lens of the heart versus that elusive or, unhealthy, sometimes at times ego, and I know we
Right,
need the ego, but we need to create a healthy ego,
right,
because the ego's not just a bad thing. It's if I'm going to fall off a cliff, my ego will say, my sense of self will say, hey,
right.
oh, you're going to fall. My physical self's going to fall. So, but we do need an
Freud,
ego.
Freud used to break down the ego so well, right?
Yeah, you're right. And but my ego's not my amigo when I'm unconscious of it, right?
Right.
You brought up Emmett Fox, and I heard an old timer one time in a meeting. Um, and he started, he spit all the lingo and stuff. He was the guru in the room,
Right.
and he talks about Emmett Fox, and my head is like, why not Eckhart Tolle or someone modern, but
Right.
it's
Right.
he's conditioned to the AA stuff ways and old timer ways, and but he made a comment about Native Americans one time, and he says it's in their genes, and I'm going back to the genes and trauma, right? And then
Hmm.
after him, I started talking to him, and I go, no, it's not so much the genes, it's the generational trauma that was never healed. And this is my question I'm going to ask you, because you work with a lot of people. Do you
Right.
always find trauma? And before you answer that, some kind of pain, some kind of hurt, some kind of trauma? Because and he goes, what do you mean it's not in their genes? It's trauma, and it was like giving Superman kryptonite. He didn't know how to take that,
Mm.
and over here in Arizona, there's a road called, and I'm surprised it's still there. It's called Indian School Road. Indian School
Hmm.
Road. And you drive down that road and it takes you to a museum. But it used to be a school where all they would basically take the kids, which is traumatizing itself, right? They would take the
Right.
children away from their parents, their family, and they would take them all the way to this school, where the Catholics will convert them. And
Mm.
you can go there and you can literally find the whole drawing, the painting of how it looked when they arrived there, um, how they changed their clothes. And it shows step by step, cut off their hair. They would be punished if they spoke their language. They only could only speak English. They would get needles in their mouth or whatever, hit, abused physically and sexually. They were abused. They cut off their hair, which is a sign of mourning in the Native community, right? So
Hmm.
it's throwing all this confusion, and they're making them believe in Jesus. They're forgetting their own ways.
Hmm.
They wiped out their whole culture, their whole essence, right?
Right.
And then they converted them into their ways, and they were molested. And you hear this multi-generational trauma that never healed, and the government never, and the religious people never took responsibility for this stuff. They never made an
Right.
amends. Giving people, just casinos and stay over here, uh, uh, that doesn't heal trauma.
No.
And the guy couldn't
That
comprehend.
just that keeps them at bay. Like, here, just
So
shut
not
up. Let's give you this, and then
so
and create some alcoholism within it too.
yeah. So, like for me, it's a deeper understanding of what creates addiction, trauma, and if we forget the whole thing and we skip those major parts of what happened, like hearing your life and trying to understand within yourself and what happened to you, um,
Hmm.
it's spiritual bypassing. And um, do you always, when you're dealing with people, can you always see where there's some kind of pain, some kind of hurt that happened to the addict? Because you work with a lot of people.
Yeah, everybody that I encounter or come in contact with, it's not that hard to see what kind of pain or trauma that they carry, just based off of what they say, body language, certain ways that they speak. You and I, we talk about being a sufferer of victimese, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing though for me to be able to see it with other people. Another is to be blind and seeing it within myself,
Mm.
because still I could get into a relationship, which I have a very beautiful relationship with a woman I love very much. But sometimes the little Pej will still come out and try to protect himself because he hasn't yet resolved a lot of the trauma, like that I probably still carry blindly without really knowing is there. I want to even say this. I was thinking about, like, when you talk about addiction and the trauma, like even people that you and I have admired, like we both loved Tupac growing up.
Hmm.
I love Prince. Prince died from a fentanyl overdose. He developed an addiction through legitimate pain medication for pain, but later was secretly using pain medication, which then turned into other pain medication that was off the black market, which killed him. Sadly, I believe Prince's ego killed him because he wanted to be secretive. And even in his last moments when they were trying to come save him, it was too late and he was out of the game. Tupac was a revolutionary who was the kid of Black Panthers. He had a voice. He was a powerful force. That man would have moved mountains if he wanted to continue to advocate for his community or just for what he believed in. But because of his ego and the way that the people he surrounded himself around, and perhaps said too much when he shouldn't have said it, it was taken out of the game, right? And so, like, what is that? Like these even the greatest celebrities that had more of a reach worldwide, that could have been able to carry a stronger message for longer, probably had a lot of unresolved trauma that they hadn't worked through yet. And so it came out in many different ways. The reason I felt compelled to talk about those people is these are the people that we grew up on, right? And although they weren't uh, spiritual teachers that we study and learn extensively about, they were spiritual teachers in their own ways, but their lives were short lived. Prince died at 57. Tupac died at 26, if I'm not mistaken, right? And I think that we need to really be careful in not letting our ego get ahead, the bad ego, right? The negative ego get ahead of us to take us out, because every mystic, when they tap into their mystical qualities, if they can just stay out of their own way and not let their ego become vocal through the way that they're broadcasting themselves, and just come with their heart, which, not to say both of those guys didn't have a lot of heart, but I think we need to be careful with that. Yes, I encounter a lot of addicts and alcoholics that carry extensive trauma. And if they don't work through that stuff, a lot of times they relapse. And I don't think the 12 steps is going to always help people overcome their trauma. It helps people take responsibility for themselves and to let stuff go. But I think sometimes, a lot of times, I didn't believe in therapy for a long time, even in my 16 plus years of recovery, until last year in my relationship. We went and started doing some couples therapy. And then I made this decision to go and do individual therapy. And in doing the individual therapy, it helped me open my eyes to a lot of the trauma that I still possess and haven't yet worked through.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that because I think the 12 steps are help to help you get started, but we might have to do some inner work somewhere else. A lot of
Absolutely.
shadow work or therapy or whatever. And I think the 12-step community should embrace and be open to like guiding people to those kind of places. At least put some updated pamphlets on that kind of stuff, especially with trauma. So I think it's an
Yeah.
important piece to talk about. I told you earlier I talked to a historian one time, and I said, "Do you think Bill was working on his childhood trauma?" And he just freaked out because like I said, a lot of
He
old
didn't want to
timers
hear that.
they're
He didn't want to
traumaphobic.
hear that.
They're
Yeah.
traumaphobic, and they don't want
You
to
know
change
what?
the narrative.
And you know what? When people are traumaphobic and they don't want to hear about trauma, especially old timers in the 12 step world, they probably carry a lot of trauma within themselves that they haven't yet identified. And that's why the second you bring up a word like that, it becomes a red flag. And listen, I'm going to say this straight up. Like when it comes to AA, and I hear it a lot more now. I actually like when people talk about trauma. Everybody that comes into the 12 step world has suffered from trauma, and the 12 steps can help you work through your trauma, no matter like whether you want to agree with me or not agree. Both of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous carried tons of trauma. You just don't read about it until you read their own personal stories in their expanded books. um, there was something I did want to say about all of this. I i do believe that we all have the ability to work through our trauma completely. But I also believe that every human being needs guidance. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. In the Iranian language, we talk about it being a peer. A peer is a PIR, means your elder. Rumi had Shams Tabrizi, right? God placed Shams in Rumi's life as a person. When Rumi was a learned man that was already the head of the School of Divinity from 18 to 31, um, he was still suffering because it was more intellect that was carrying his outlook of God as opposed to from the soul and from the heart. And God put that man in his path. I'm blessed. I'm blessed because God has placed angels in my path. And when I say angels, I mean they are the greatest mentors that have been on my recovery journey. And I don't just mean my AA sponsor. The guys that have acted as my AA sponsors were definitely instrumental in my recovery. But there are people that stand out to me that carry wisdom that I could turn to and get more out of than in a therapy session 10 times over.
Yeah, everyone's different. Everyone's different. Everyone perceives things differently. So we should be open to all paths. There's no right way, one way, and we should kind of walk together and try to just be helpful and help people because
Absolutely.
and embrace like the different routes, the different roads. There's smart recovery. There's the
Yeah.
Buddhist thing. There's the Christian.
Refuge
Yeah,
recovery.
yeah. What's
Refuge,
the
yep.
what's the Christian one? Um,
Celebrate recovery.
Celebrate
That's one of them.
recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's
then
there's
there's even one called SOS where they don't believe in any God or any higher
yeah,
power, and
and that's fine
which is
too.
kind
It's
yeah,
whatever speaks to people,
right.
because whether one believes in God or not, you talked about our essence, and we don't have to label that anything. We have the
That's
power
right.
within us, whether you want to call it God or not. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna ask you one more quick question.
Okay.
Calling yourself an alcoholic or an addict in meetings. I've spoken up on that as well, and I've talked a lot about the trauma of Bill and Bob, and I like to speak up on stuff because sometimes having that awakening, you could develop deeper awareness on what's healthy and what's not healthy within yourself, and I think calling myself an alcoholic is not healthy. Going to meetings over and over because conscious repeated thoughts become unconscious thinking, and And I know that's meant to be helpful for someone that's new, but it's
Mhm.
really it's meant to like sit down with that person individually and let them say, hey, that's me. Not at every meeting saying that over and over and over. I think that's very
Yeah.
unhealthy. And it
Mhm.
can create the placebo effect if you don't watch out with the negative beliefs and thoughts that form in a group think. And so I had to like say, you know what, this stuff's not healthy for me to say. You know, thinking AA is like the mafia. If you leave, you die. That's
Yeah.
dangerous. You know, or you have a daily reprieve. Maybe when I was in survival mode sobriety, that's true
Mhm.
for me. That was definitely true. I needed to work on myself. So I was on survival mode sobriety, and all I had
Yeah.
is a daily reprieve, right? Until I
Mhm.
heal myself, you know, and experience freedom and change neuroplasticity. You know, we can recreate a new mind, and that's what the
Mhm.
beauty of the 12 steps help me do is to shift that fear, that energy of fear, into understanding and love. You know, and I still have stuff to work on. I could still see some stuff. We always have room to work on ourselves, right? But
Mhm.
I had to watch myself. I had to disconnect from some of that unhealthy behaviors, like calling myself an alcoholic at a meeting over and over. Do you still do that?
Well, I learned from you actually. You and I had some great conversations early on. It was during the pandemic where you told me that sometimes when you identify, you say you're a grateful member of the
Blah blah blah.
organization,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Now, I'm very much with you on the labeling of things. You have to understand, like, let's say, for example, I have a sex addiction or a porn addiction, right? That means that if I'm always looking at porn, then I'm a porn addict. So if I go to like Sex Love Anonymous or Sex Anonymous meetings and I'm still like really hung up on this thing, I might identify as a porn addict because I'm looking at porn every day. But if I stop looking at porn, then I'm not addicted to that. So why would I go into a meeting and say I'm a porn addict or a sex addict, right? And I use that as like something that I might actively do, like a food addict. If I'm a food addict and I go to OA, Overeaters Anonymous, if I stop like becoming, if I overcome my addiction to eating all the time, then I'm not addicted to the food. So why would I say I'm a food addict? You and I talked about this, like even in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, at the very front of the forewords, it talks about when identifying, it says we omit our names. When we're identifying publicly, we should identify as members of Alcoholics Anonymous and omit our names. So what is publicly? Like if I go to an AA meeting, isn't that in public? And so when if I'm following what the book is suggesting, why am I using my name, right? And why am I not saying what it's suggesting in the book to say I'm a member of the organization as opposed to an alcoholic? So who really even said that we have to call ourselves an alcoholic? Well, then they created these traditions and they said, we would like for you to identify as an alcoholic in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, if you have a desire not to drink, then you can share here too. So now it leaves that wide open. I pay attention to what I'm saying. If I'm speaking in a 12-step meeting, I will say, based off of what I learned from you, Boo Boo, sometimes it will come out of my mouth. I'm a grateful member or I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Why would I say that? Because I'm basically speaking as a member and I'm allowed to be a member and say I'm a member because I'm in a group right now where I'm a member of your group, right? But I'm not an active addict. Some people like to say recovered alcoholic, or I could say recovered from alcoholism. But then we can dissect that and say, well, was alcoholism really what Dr. Silkworth called it? Or was that something that this doctor came up with and Bill went off of that and now all these other people follow that because they follow the 12-step world, right? Um, every once in a while I'll be in a meeting and I'll say Pej alcoholic. Why is that? Because maybe on that certain day within that certain setting, out of respect to that certain group, I just say, okay, I'm an alcoholic because maybe there's some newcomers that are seeing that and hearing that, and I'm people pleasing everyone in the group, right? Maybe that too. But I will also say this. I want to be very conscious of what kind of label I am putting on myself because I am not an active addict and I'm not an active alcoholic. Therefore, I don't want to call myself an addict. I am a person who was a former addict formerly addicted and former alcoholic, formerly drinking as an alcoholic, I hear another guy that often shares, my name is this and that, and I suffer from alcoholism. And I'm thinking, no, I don't even suffer from alcoholism anymore. Like, I don't. Like, if you really read about more about alcoholism in the big book, it is describing in the big book what a person in active alcoholism is, right? I've kind of gone off on with this, like, and rambled a bit, but I'll say this. I don't omit my name. I do say my name in a meeting so that people get to know me. I'll never turn my back on the 12-step world. I love it. I won't leave it. It's not because I love sharing in it or speaking in it. It is where I got part of my life back. I don't consider AA to be the meetings. I don't even consider it to be the conferences. I consider AA to be in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So just because some people in AA might be dogmatic or carry a certain ideology or profess how one should act as an AA, that doesn't mean to me that that's AA. That's part of the fellowship. That's the fellowship, and you're going to get a mixed bag of people in the fellowship. I will continue to go. I don't go to as many meetings as I used to, and I don't think meetings keep me sober, right? I don't at all, right? But I go to meetings because I want to go carry the message that I was taught to carry. But I get to recreate myself, as the book talks about, and carry it the way I want to carry it. I don't need to like sit there and quote lines from the big book to sound like I'm so advanced in AA. I can do that. I can give an AA talk for a bunch of old timers in an AA meeting. But when I do go and I speak in an AA meeting, I do respect the steps. The singleness of purpose I respect to a certain extent, but I think most people that go to AA these days don't just have, they're polysubstance abusers. They're not just alcoholics. So to sit here and say, we just talk about alcohol, it's a bunch of crap to me. It's like the big book itself has tons of drug talk in it within itself, right? So yeah, I hear other people on your podcast talk about that. I myself, out of respect to AA as a whole, will call myself an alcoholic when I feel like it, and sometimes I will just say I am a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, thank you. I actually contacted New York a long time ago, some years ago, and they told me Bill never even called himself an alcoholic before he started talking. That was something that was developed through the fellowship, and they believe from the maybe in the somewhere in the 40s. I think it was 46 or 45 or somewhere. There was a documentary called "I'm an Alcoholic." They thought that was cool, so they went around the room and started developing. It spread everywhere. But that's the
Right.
custom, you know. And to be true to myself, I can't call myself that. You know, why am I going to
Right.
reaffirm someone I don't want to be that I'm not? You know,
Right.
that's the false self. So I don't let group think for me, and I think that's because of the 12 steps. It helped me expand and have an awakening, and that's not healthy lingo for me. And but to
That's
my
why.
own
That's
self
why.
be true, you know.
No,
To my
that's
own
why I
self
love
be
and
true.
respect you, because you have identified what a collective consciousness, a group of collective consciousness will come and do, and how they will talk. And you're right. I think a lot of the stuff that's said and done in AA is just parroted off of stuff that people created along the way that wasn't even originally the message of the original message.
But even the original message, I think it's important for people to know that Bill and Bob, they didn't know everything, you know.
They didn't.
And I always tell people, would you want to have a surgery in the 1939, or do you want to have surgery now? You know, we've grown so much, we in understanding, and just we know so much more about addiction than they did in the third 1930s.
Boo
So
Boo, when you took me to Dr. Bob's house, here's what went through my mind. When we went upstairs and looked in his bedroom and saw on the floor the magazines and book laid out to put together the big book,
mhm.
it was clear as day for me that they did not completely know. They didn't know if this book was going to flop. They were studying varieties of religious experience and all these other magazines and books and pamphlets and things like that to put together something. But I will say this: the way that Bill wrote at 3 years of sobriety, wrote the big book in such masterly detail, certainly came out as if God was writing through the pen.
Yeah, I
What
don't believe that, but
I believe it. I think later, when I do believe it came out good enough for that time and to carry on for these decades to help a lot of people, because lots of people stayed sober. However, like when it comes to the 12 and 12, different animal. I think he came at it with a more psychological approach of kind of trying to break down the steps some more 17 years later when he was living a whole different life.
No, but I do believe, and I agree that he did a awesome job for only having 3 years of sobriety. I couldn't do that.
Absolutely.
He did take a lot of the here from here and here, and put what he did was he connected dots, and then he put it into writing. Um, and yeah, but he did a lot better than I could have did.
I'm telling you, even if he doctored all that stuff together and put it the way he did,
yeah,
like it carried a strong message that was like it helped people stay sober through that mushrooming process and the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous.
And the ones that didn't got kind of erased from history, so because a lot of people didn't stay sober, but it did help a lot of people, and I truly respect that. And I'm truly grateful for the 12-step community because it taught me how to live on a spiritual basis. And so I don't hate on the 12-step community. I just encourage people to, especially old timers, growth. We need to continue to grow, or we're being a disservice to humanity if we stay in that big book and not change it around. Because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be changed. Because the newcomers are not the guys in 1939, as you know so well, because you work with a lot of them, and I respect you for that. So I think we need to continue to understand. And I like what Bill wrote at the very end. He humbly wrote, "We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us." So I think we can. It doesn't have to be gospel. We can put it to the side and start to use our intellect and intuition that the 12 steps promise through an awakening, and praying only for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out, so we can carry the message more effectively in a new century.
Right.
And I appreciate you, Pej, and I love you, and thank you for coming on.
I love you too.
Yeah.
I appreciate you for having me.
I'll end it with the Rumi quote.
Go for it.
Let me remember it first. He says, "Religious zealots live in fear of doomsday, while enlightened Sufis live forever free from such foolish anxieties." And the big book promises freedom, and I hear some freedom in you, and I definitely know there's some freedom in me because of the 12-step communities and learning how to live on a spiritual basis. I no longer have a daily reprieve. I learned how to live one day at a time and be more present in the moment. And for that, I'm truly grateful. And thank you for coming on and helping us create a broader lens.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Pej.
Much love.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on the day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.